All right, welcome everybody to this incredible masterclass, Building Your Dream Team. I have Dr. Alan Miner, CEO of Chiro Matchmakers, on here with us today. Graduated Parker University in 2003, and today owns a group of chiropractic clinics in New Mexico and Texas called Illuminate Chiropractic. In addition, like I said, to being the CEO of Chiro Matchmakers, last year alone, they placed over 250 associate doctors and over 400 chiropractic assistants around the world. They also have a dance studio. He has a vodka company. And so he's a wealth of knowledge for all things hiring, teams, scaling, and growing businesses. And so super excited to have you on here, Dr. Allen. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Josiah. It's a pleasure to be on here with you today. We've known each other for a long time, and as you read my list of things I've done, you have an equal list when we get to chatting offline. And I think at the heart of all of that is the people. I mean, none of these businesses for me, and I think it's the same for you, exist without really amazing people, amazing leadership teams. You and I aren't wearing 50 hats all day long. And so that's what I hope to share today is how does a clinic owner start to build a business that is truly operationalized, there's redundancy, it's professionalized, meaning it's not all about the person who started it, but about the team they can build so that eventually I'll actually start with a quick story. I sold my first practice to an A doc who still runs it today, probably the first A player I ever hired. And we'll get into that today. I think so many chiropractors are used to working with C and B players, and you don't even know what an A player looks like. And anyways, this doc came along, and he commanded a premium price tag, which really made me cringe at the time, but I kind of knew in my spirit that he was probably worth it. And in the end, he purchased the practice for $1.2 million. And it's a thriving clinic today. And the best part of that story is I think 3 months later, my wife turned to me and said, "Why did we sell that? Like, it was nice to get a check once, but we used to get $30,000-$40,000 a month without even blinking. I'd rather have the cash flow." And it really kind of set or reset this assumption I'd had of exiting. And so I tell that story to share this. I own 4 clinics today, 5 clinics, if you include a decompression clinic. I don't think there's a better investment on earth than a chiropractic practice. I do not know if you spend 20 years of your life building a clinic, if you can operationalize that clinic so it runs without you, which I don't want to sell the dream that you can have a business you'd ever have to be in and you're on the beach all day sipping cocktails. I have not found that to be reality, but I also don't have to be the one day to day in there providing service. But there's no better annuity. I've not found an investment that pays back the ROI that a chiropractic clinic does. And so there's so many docs that are, I think, trying to get out of their clinic. I want to have a conversation today about the teams and the people we build in. So what if you didn't ever have to exit your clinic because it's such a beautiful business, it's making an impact, and it provides a great quality of life? And I'll tell you, for all the businesses that we have, for all the investments I've done, there's still just nothing beats a chiropractic practice. And so I intend to have our practices till I'm 100. I don't know why we would sell another one, to my wife's point. So I'd love to get into that today as well and share some pointers and insights. And I've had 4 failed clinics. So I'm happy to talk about, probably learn more from those experiences than the successful ones. So yeah, whatever we can share, happy to.
Absolutely. That's great. And that's really, kind of leads me into me. I want to share a little bit my own personal experience, exactly how you talked about, you scaling your clinics and the things that you've learned and the scars that we've had along the way from mistakes and opportunity costs. And, that was my big learning point, scaling my clinic right after I graduated is I quickly learned, I was sleeping on my adjusting tables most nights, my first 6 months year in practice, I slept at the practice a lot, trying to keep up with marking up x-rays or making care plans or doing all those other things that you got to do in between the practice to not only be the head doctor, but also the CEO and the head of marketing and the head of sales and head of finance and all those different hats, that you wear along the way. And so that's where I was really blessed and thankful, that I found Chiro Matchmakers at an early age. I was even blessed. I talked to you when I was in Palmer at chiropractic
I
school.
remember. I
Mark
know.
Mao, one of the owners of Chiro Matchmaker, his son Jordan was just a few trimesters below me, and we went and visited Mark's clinic, and I was telling him I just had my first son in chiropractic clinic, chiropractic school, and I was like, I went to a couple of these offices around the country, and these chiropractors were delivering doctor's reports till 10 p.m. at night, and they're 15, 20 years into practice, and I was like, man, I need to be home with my kids, not like doing, how do I get the practice to run without me?
Mm.
And Mark said, give Dr. Allen a call. And I remember talking to you right outside of P201. If anyone knows the Palmer, they know what room I'm talking about, in the hallway. And biggest thing you said is you need to build a team. You can't have a personality driven practice. If the practice is named after you and relies on you and you're the face and you're the only person, you can't go on vacation and you can't transition to an associate doctor and you can't do the next steps and really have the life that you want to have or be the entrepreneur that you want to be if everything comes back on your shoulders. And so that was a big part of me not naming my clinic, with my name in it, a big part of me having that mindset, from day one of opening my practice of who do I need on my team. The whole who, not how concept, was really embedded in me from that conversation. And so, I've used Chiro Matchmakers since I opened, hiring my numerous associates. I don't know how many I've hired, through you guys over the year, and CAs. And now I know you guys also offer virtual CAs, which I want to talk about,
Mm.
here in a little bit. But if you're part of Lucro, or even if you're not part of Lucro, if you look at your P&L at all, your number one expense month over month, year over year is always going to be your team. It's always going to be your payroll, and it should be, right? We're in a service-based profession, right, where we deliver a service. People don't walk out with a watch or a car or a bag or a product 99% of the time. They walk out with how we change their physiology with a chiropractic adjustment. So how your team makes that person feel with all the interactions, from the initial phone call to the front desk to the doctors in the room to the follow-up to the birthdays, all those little touch points are all human driven touch points. And so that is where I really realized the value that we provide in a service-based business makes the value of employees dramatically higher than, let's say, if you go to a restaurant and you get a product. If I go to, Chick-fil-A, I love their service, but at the end of the day, I'm going to grade them on the quality of the food, right? But in a chiropractic clinic, you could have a front desk team member say one bad thing, or doctors have one bad adjustment, and that person wants to stop care, right? And so the value of a team, the opportunity cost of not having a great team, is absolutely massive. And so I think it's the number one bottleneck in our entire profession is team. And no matter where you want to go individually, it's always going to be the number one bottleneck or the number one plateau for you to get to the next level. So, let's just jump right in. I want to kind of start right off about just hiring mistakes, right? Because I think that where a lot of the decisions to not hire is based around fear, right? Dr. Allen, like you said, it is a big expense. It is, takes a lot of money. And so making the wrong hire, or hiring someone that maybe you feel like you can't afford, I feel like prevents a lot of doctors from investing into teams. So maybe let's jump into that as the first topic.
Yeah, I don't know why my mind went there, but maybe because you said Chick-fil-A. It's a little, have you ever looked at studies at how much of take-home pay, this is like in the 30s, 40s, 50s, it was a pretty large percentage of take-home pay that Americans spent on food. And over the years, we spend less and less of our total income on food, but it's also correlated with the quality of food's gone down and health expenses have gone up. And I know that's a weird parallel, but there's some parallels with the staff of a clinic. And the challenge is we are small businesses. I mean, you just talked about it beautifully. You were sleeping on the tables wearing four hats. And here's the balancing act. So let's just speak into this. You've got to, most chiropractors come out of school or they've been an associate. And when it's time to go on your own, you don't have a paycheck unless you're working a second job, which, sometimes might be really advisable. So if there's some extra money in the clinic, you're constantly having to ask, all right, do I take on that role so I can keep that money so I can make an apartment payment or a car payment or a student loan payment or eat? Or do I reinvest some of that or all of that to finding some good people? And so that's why so often small businesses end up hiring mom, dad, brother, sister, best friend, which, I get it when you're starting out, but it can also, we know as you scale and you start to hit different break points in a business, those are usually the break points is the friends and family you've brought in early on. So there's an art to this. This is actually what created the virtual CA side of things because we really work with two ends of the spectrum. We have some really big successful clinics, and they realize a lot of the work they do is monotonous, it's boring, it's the stuff that their team doesn't love doing. So they want to make sure their team's engaged in culture and motivated and loving their work. And when they got to do these three things, it's really a time drain. Or what usually happens is the business just doesn't do those things, and the business would benefit from keeping, weekly KPIs and metrics. And well, somebody's got to go in and compile those every week. And some CAs love it, but a lot of CAs hate doing that. And so that's just one little microcosm of an example. But as an owner, the better you know your data, that's the whole point of Lucro, the better decisions you make. And so, that's one of many things. And so we get a lot of people are just trying to say, how can I put more money in my pocket, stabilize my business, and keep my employees happier doing the parts of the job they love? But the other end of the spectrum is we have a lot of, single docs who are, I think, doing it the right way. They launched, in one room. They're learning how to sell chiropractic, how to deliver and get great clinical outcomes, and they have the time. You're always either trading your money or your time, and usually whichever you tend to trade what you have least of, right? So for the opposite. So if you have less money, you'll use your time. As you have more money, you'll use your money to buy back your time. So that's a common one that docs start going, I'm not answering all the phones all the time. Can you help us with that? I'm not getting metrics. I'm not doing follow up. I'm not getting my notes in. Again, what's redundant and monotonous? But when you have a lens, Josiah, and I love how you guys are tracking that overhead expense because for the first half of my career, I didn't know. Like I never had a dashboard telling me what percentage, what should it be? Nobody's talking about that. I didn't know. And so when I started, I could hire a CA for $8, and now we get in this interesting thing where, I think Starbucks is $20, and where I live, a lot of the Carl's Jr. is $18. So now for a lot of chiropractors, $20 is the top end of what they want to pay. But so now you've got to make a decision. Do I do that as the owner? Do I hire somebody? Do I give up some of my income to bring that person on? At what point am I willing to give up? And this really gets amplified when we get to the associate doctor level. And let's just be honest, we've had some of the wonkiest relationships with owners and associate doctors. And I don't think I think it's changing as businesses learn to become better businesses. But it was really born out of a lot of owners trying to get help, but they couldn't afford help. So they'd set up these really weird comp models where, when I started, it was like a $30,000 base and you'd get percentages of care that you brought in or care plans you sold, and so the owner would be showing you should be able to make $300,000 this year, and the doc made 35,000, and it's like this is not working, and we still have those docs who call us like I don't want to pay over 50,000 for an associate. Well, that world's changed, and we can get into those numbers. Because we place so many associates, we get to talk to all kinds of different practices, practice owners, small ones, big ones. We've got everything from functional clinics to clinics like yours. We're offering a lot of services to pediatric clinics, straight chiropractic clinics. Understanding these metrics really is what I want to illuminate for everybody listening today, and use your data to share that. I mean, I'm curious, Dr. Josiah, what are you guys seeing? Like, what's the benchmark when it comes to what's the average, and what do you guys coach as the benchmark for payroll expense? And do you break it out into staff versus doctors, or is it lumped? Do you include the owner? I mean, educate me here. I'm kind of curious what your data is showing.
Yeah. I'll just share. This might be a good opportunity. I'll just share my screen here with the perfect P&L here. So this is really, what we have established as the perfect P&L. And the cool thing, what you're alluding to is, this is based off of the data set that we have right now, but now over 300 clients are utilizing Lucro. And so we're going to have this data is going to get more refined, but there's also a difference between the average and the best and the most ideal, right? What's perfect versus what's actually happening. For example, marketing average clinic, we're finding is spending 2.3% on marketing when they should be spending a lot more, right?
Sure.
So what's actually happening versus, what ideally should be happening. And so as you can see, the big thing with labor, like I said, is it's always the biggest percentage, but it should really be increasing over time because you're handing things off. At this level, when you first getting started, like we were just talking about, you're wearing so many different hats. You're involved with so many different aspects of the clinic. And so as you scale and start to hand those things off, your business ideally is running more and more without you. And therefore it's a staff driven practice, not a personality or a doctor driven practice anymore. And so, my clinic is definitely up in this upper echelon where we're usually somewhere between 45 and 50%, every single month,
This is monthly.
monthly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, so let's just talk about a stat just to make this real. Um, we're seeing something that, that according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average associate doctor right now makes 89,000 around across the US, all markets. But probably a little later than it's probably been the end of Q1, mid Q2 in the joint everybody's familiar with. In most markets, the joint bump up to $100,000 base salary last year. And we've really seen that ripple through the profession quickly. And so, then it becomes a math equation. So, all right, what is that a month? Maybe 9,000 or something with payroll tax of that overhead number. So, depending where you're at on that scale, if do you have an associate yet or not? Well, it's a pretty good rule of thumb of an associate's going to cost you, let's for math purposes, just say 10,000 a month when you throw in payroll tax and maybe even licensing. Um, all right, so how much are you collecting? Well, if you're collecting 25,000 a month, that doesn't really work. As a matter of fact, we like to do math when somebody calls us, I need an associate. Great, tell me about your practice, the volume, the technique, the style. And we get into a collections conversation. And a general rule of thumb, Josiah, is if you're hiring an associate and you're paying $100,000, a minimum ROI on that should be 300, a 3-to-1 return, but we're really comfortable with 4 or 5-to-1. So that means if you're paying 100,000 salary, that associate doctor should be generating 500,000 on the low end, 300 on the high end, 500,000 of revenue. And the logic's really simple. As the owner, it's a third, a third, a third. A third of that goes to the salary, a third of that to the overhead if you've got to pay for the marketing, the staff, the team, the building. And you've taken all the risk. I mean, you're the one who went sleeping on the bed and didn't get a paycheck. So then there should be a profit margin in that. It's interesting how many docs do get on the phone with us and their practice is doing $200,000-300,000 and they want an associate. And the truth is, what money that practice does generate is the owner, you need that to live on most likely. And so now you've got to make a decision. Is there any place to cut expenses? Do I just have to suck it up and grow this to another level where now I can afford to give up 100,000 I would be taking home to an associate doctor? But knowing these numbers really sets the stage. I've seen you do this beautifully, Josiah, to having a good, healthy relationship where you're collaborating, your doctors are seen as equals. There's a funny dynamic in chiropractic where owners tend to look at associates as a less than instead of a colleague. And there's no every brain surgeon at your hospital is an associate. They don't call themselves associate brain surgeons. They're just brain surgeons and they collaborate and they look at cases. But
Good. Good.
owners get this. And we found the best relationships are this collaborative colleague kind of environment. Um, and then you throw on what the average student debt is. And so there's this separation in clinics that's happening right now where these clinics who've stayed at two, three, $400,000, and it's enough for an owner who maybe opened 15 years ago, 20 years ago, who doesn't have 300,000 of student loan debt, who maybe's been able to pay off an office or a house, they can live off of that. But then you got to jump up to, well, how does this, what's the revenue? And if you go back to your monthly numbers, let's just, I think it's around 40, 45,000 is the monthly number to do a half a million a year. So if 10,000 of that 45,000 is going out the door to an associate, I'm not that great at math, but that's probably 20 plus percent, right?
Yeah, the easiest equation I would say, and you guys could steal this for your calls, is whatever is just 100 divided by their profit margin. So if their profit margin is 33%, 100 divided by 33 would be 3. That would be the minimum. So that's really how we talk about with marketing too. How much do you need on any type of investment, whether a staff investment or a marketing investment? It's really based on your profit margin. If you have a 20% profit margin, 100 divided by 20, you need a 5x ROI to break even, right? And so when you incorporate that all in together, that's really an easy way to figure out. So like I said, 100 divided by your profit margin, do that right now. If you're on this call, whatever your profit margin is, 100 divided by 40%, 100 divided by 40, 100 would be 2.5, so whatever you're paying the doctor, they need to generate, 2.5x, that's the break even point, right?
Yeah.
Is kind of the basic framework, that we like to have. And then anything above that, is obviously, greater profitability. And that's a big mindset shift. What you're alluding to, Dr. Miner, is investing in your team, viewing your team as investments and assets, not liabilities, right? Because it's so easy to just think of the expense, but all the time, anybody that's in chiropractic, that's an entrepreneur, follows these other, entrepreneurs, and Robert Kiyosaki, right? What do they always talk about? Assets versus liabilities, right? And the poor buy liabilities, the rich buy assets. Well, you really need to shift the mindset that your team members are your greatest assets. Your team members have the greatest potential to generate the highest ROI of whatever you're paying them. The ROI of paying them more or having better team members is going to be maximally important. And so that's kind of the next topic I want to jump into is A players versus C players. Because you touched on a little bit, the price of a CA has maybe gone from $8 an hour. For me, when I first started, it was $11 an hour. And now I don't feel like we can get a good one from really below 22, maybe $24
Yeah.
an hour, where I'm at in Iowa, so some bigger markets, might even be, pushing closer to $30 to really get an A player. And so the big thing I always think about, well, let's just say for easy math sake is $20 an hour in your area is an A player. Well, $16 an hour gets you a C player, right? So $4 more an hour, that's about $8,000 more a year. What's their LTV of a client? What's the lifetime value of a client worth? If you only have $2,000 LTV, that one staff member from a C player to an A player only needs to impact 4 more signups or 4 more retentions, an entire 365-day a year calendar, to be worth $4 extra. But as we all know, the value of an A player, not just in increasing revenue, but decreasing fires, decreasing all these extra headaches, that I think people, have with staff. And I think that's where, again, there's some hesitancy, for people to think, I don't want to have more staff. More people is just more work. So, like I said, maybe expand out a little bit of that A versus C players, how really having A players is less work, paying a few more bucks. Not only is it worth a return ROI standpoint, but it's the freedom ROI as an owner as well.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here. On a real practical first level basis, for the CAs we hire through Chiro Matchmakers, the DCs we hire, we love cognitive assessments and behavioral assessments. Just start there. There are tools you can use. There's just so much data you can get today before you sit down and interview somebody to know more about them that professional HR people do. It's what we do for our clients. You've all had that CA where you taught them something once and a week and a half in, they seem to know the whole job. And then the other person you hired, it's 3 months later and you've been over everything 10 times and they don't understand it. And you're like, what? That's measurable through cognitive awareness. But man, I don't know how to express this, Josiah, but because I hired a lot of sweet people, but they were C players, and I'll even go back to the doc who brought my clinic. At the time I was paying associates 50, 60,000. That was the normal. And he came in and wanted 85. And I went, oh my gosh. But man, from day one he showed up, he was delivering. I mean, that was $1 million clinic. And it was my first taste of like, this is interesting. Like I think there's a lot of data. You can read different books and we could find what they say, but it's exponential what an A player does. I mean, what he would do, what three other associates I had in the past could do, and with joy and ease. And it was interesting to watch, like to your point, like this extra $35,000, $3,000 a month is coming back tenfold. And that was maybe my first taste. And then like all good entrepreneurs, I've had seasons where I don't attract great people or I make bad hires or but as you start to appreciate what it is to work with people smarter than you, and that's the mark of any good business owner, is your goal should be to find people better than you. If you're the one who's got to be the smartest person on your team, you're in for a long road. But if you can paint a compelling enough vision for where you're taking this, that's really the special thing that attracts A players, I have found, is they will be, as the owner, it's your job to cast the vision and the direction for where this is going. And if it's compelling, you will be able to attract in some amazing talent who want to be part of that road with you. And here's the other thing, the longer you work, your standard of what an A player goes up as well. But I'm in Albuquerque right now where some of our clinics are, and it's been amazing to watch us the last 5 years as we've really, drilled down on our metrics and our KPIs. And we use, for every interaction in our clinics, we use scorecards with our VAs. So we randomly listen in to a doctor's report, to a check-in procedure, check-out, and we're constantly scoring our team. And before we had that in place, we just didn't know if people were, we didn't know what we'd train. It sounded like they were good, but we didn't really know. And all of a sudden when we started listening and everybody knows the scorecard and knows how they're scored, and you start having, that's where we really are able to measure the A, B, the C, the D player, the people, the doctors who sounded great on our training but their conversion rate was 20%. I was like, what's going on here? There was a gap, but I didn't have a way to actually quantify, are they a C or a D player? I just kind of saw it in the outcome. And so there's more sophisticated ways as you grow to actually capture this and quantify it. And we know really clearly now, the point is we know what makes an A player front
Yeah,
desk.
maybe let's dive in. I think
Yeah.
like, it's like so easy for you to be like cognitive tests, KPIs. I think these are just like, for me and you, these are like basic fundamentals, but I don't think a lot of people, maybe on this call or, watching the recording, those might not be the norm for them. So let's go a little bit, below the surface, deeper level on cognitive evaluation. Can you break down, hey, what is the skill set difference that you're looking, in for an a front desk team member versus a back office,
Yeah.
team member, a practice builder versus a caregiver, and I think so many people are just going off of gut and feeling and, in-person interview or phone interview or looking at a resume, but that, like you were saying, can be very surface level and you think you got this amazing hire and then you're like, what happened, So yeah, but give me a little, maybe like more specific value for people. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, okay, they want to hire a front desk team member. What's the ideal cognitive assessment, of a front desk person?
Yeah. Yeah, well, let's just start with a fundamental, as chiropractors, I have a fundamental belief that the body's a self-healing, self-regulating organism. That's different than the doctor down the street who thinks, no, you need help with pills and drugs and your body wasn't designed that well, but it needs my help from the outside in. So a fundamental belief I have around team building is that everybody has their own genius. I've really found that to be true. And I think at the heart of this, how you find an A player is you have to define the role and the behavior and the personality makeup of somebody who would excel in that role and then match them. And I think you stack, it doesn't always work perfectly that way, but you stack the deck in your favor. Let's just go extreme. Let's say you need a back office person. who's literally in a spreadsheet. They're in EOBs, super bills, data, KPIs, whatever it is, all day long. I can't think of a more stressful thing for me to have to do, to sit in one place looking at lines. But so the dream person for that job is certainly not me. There's people out there where, yes, sign me up. I don't have to deal with people. I can look at these numbers, I can organize them, I can analyze them, I can help the owner, like they love that. So that when we talk about cognitive and behavioral assessments, that's the end goal. And that's how you help attract better A players is you get really clear on what you're doing, who you're hiring, and why. And so now you can use these different tools to measure people and at least get an idea, okay, how are they hardwired? And it doesn't match the job I have. The old uh oh gosh, I just blanked on the book. Um right people, right seat, right bus. Traction. That's what that is. And so I learned from early on, Google was using all these cognitive assessments, and they just wanted to be. So it's not IQ. Cognitive really measures how fast you can throw stuff at people and how quick they learn and assimilate it. And you measure that. It's you guys have heard of maybe the most popular one of this is they use in the NFL. It's I just blanked. Not Colby, not Myers-Briggs. Those are behavioral assessments. Um, anyways, if you Google it, it'll come to me in a minute. What's the test they use for quarterbacks, Josiah?
Wonderlic test.
Wonderlic, thank you. Wonderlic was kind of the first famous cognitive. And so the NFL would use it on quarterbacks because these guys have to digest huge playbooks and analyze defenses, and they learn, that was the genius of Tom Brady and Eli Manning and that season of quarterbacks. They weren't great athletes. They just had
No, they weren't.
amazing cognitive ability. So they knew from all the game film, they knew from the second they got to the line what was going to happen based on player movements. So that same thing can be applied in a clinic. And just how long is it going to take somebody to learn my day one, my day two, my check-in, my check-out, my whatever it is you have them doing. The other side of this then is behavioral assessments. And everybody knows a lot of these. There's DISC, Myers-Briggs, Colby, Enneagram. I think any of them point you in the right direction. You do need to be careful. A lot of those lower level ones are not EEOC compliant. And if you look a little bit, just dig on whatever you're using, just double check is, DISC EEOC compliant. Generally, DISC is not. That matters because you could, in theory, give one of those tests to somebody, not hire them, and they could say, hey, they didn't hire me because they discriminated against me because I didn't do good on that test. And so there's a lot of those tests are EEOC compliant, meaning they're not discriminatory. So just double check whatever you're using. We like one because it mashes up so well with chiropractic called PDP. There's this lower level suite of behavioral tests, but then there's an upper level one. Our PDP license is about $100,000 a year. So, doesn't make sense for the typical chiropractor to buy that license. We have a ton of people all day long that come to us just to do these PDP assessments. We charge $150. But there's other ones, Culture Index, Predictive Index. These are ones that the licenses are 10, 20, 30, $100,000. A lot of Fortune 100 companies use them who are hiring at volume. But whether you're using a lower level one like DISC or Myers-Briggs or a higher level one, it helps you to get a basic understanding of how's this person wired. Where are what's their take charge dominance measurements? Are they extroverted? Are they more reserved and introverted? Are they likely to stay long term, or are they a flight risk and they have low patience and they're likely to leave? Are they systems oriented and detail oriented? Or are they big picture oriented? Are they good at starting things? Are they good at finishing things? Are they super loyal? There's a lot of stuff you can measure, which just, if you've ever had that experience, and most of us have, you interview somebody, you love them, you hire them, and 2 months later you're like, this is not the person that I interviewed. Like, how did this happen? Those behavioral assessments will usually help you to see, is this person, because you always go back to kind of your natural, how you're wired, but you might be acting differently because of the stress in your life. And if you're changing jobs, you usually have a lot of stress, financial, work stress. So it causes you to act different. And sometimes people act so different that how you read them on an interview is not the person you're going to end up with. So that's another reason we love behavioral assessments, just to look on the front end. Who am I hiring? We found it makes your hiring a lot more accurate. So that's the context. So then when you look at, and Josiah, you marry, what's somebody's God-given genius and strengths? How's that mesh with their behavioral and their cognitive ability? Now you've got a lens, if you really define the role you have as a greeter at the front desk, or as a tech CA, or as a back office CA, a BOCA, or somebody who has to take care of, staff and reprimand people, or collect money from patients. Like, that's a different person. That's a different kind of behavioral person who likes that. And by the way, there's people who love, Donald Trump is maybe the example. A guy like that, high dominance, super energized. Like, he loves the fight. He loves the pushback. He likes to debate. Those people are great at collecting money. They enjoy it. But then there's other people who go, oh my gosh, it's so uncomfortable. I don't want to do it. So knowing your people and knowing what role you're going to have them perform really sets you up for success. And then if behind that, you have really clear expectations, really clear training, and really key scorecards and metrics and KPIs. So when you're hiring them, they can see those and they know exactly what they're going to be measured on. The goal is your team should never wonder if they're doing a good job. They should know, I'm hired for the role that I'm doing. I'm hitting my KPIs. They should know I'm slaying my job. If they're wondering, I wonder if I'm doing a good job, then as an owner, as a leader, you probably haven't built the right structure for that feedback loop for your people. So that's a lot of info and a long answer. You got to get technical when you talk
Yeah.
about A players. And then just on a high level, A players know what they're worth. And I've never regretted. Now, some people are good at pretending they're an A player, but when you really get an A player, I've never regretted that. It's worth every penny you pay them. You see that investment come back tenfold easily from the work they do. And usually they do the work of 2, 3, 4 other regular B, C level people. That's maybe the biggest thing to realize.
Yeah, no, I think you're walking through what I really feel is like the filtration process of, of applicant flow. First of all, we talked about right person. That's alignment with core values. First of all, do you have defined core values for your company? If not, you need to, right? Because that's the first lens. Are they the right person for your organization at all? Then you're saying, okay, what's the right seat? All right, so then every seat in your position, you need to have definitions of what you're talking about. What is the cognitive aptitude abilities, for that seat? What is the primary skill set that is necessary to be successful in that seat? And then what are the deliverables? What is the primary purpose or the outcomes, from a subjective standpoint, and then the KPIs from an objective standpoint of that role. And so that's what crafts not only your job description, but also your performance review. And that's how I really like to talk about. We actually did a KPIs, Mastering KPIs Masterclass. We can get that posted in the chat for everybody to review. But I go through kind of what is the primary skill, purpose, and KPIs for each of the different roles within my company. And so that's what I feel like is really, you need to have that blueprint laid out. To what you're saying, Dr. Allen, is identify who you're looking for. Don't just say, hey, I want to hire a front desk person. Well, what is the ideal front desk person? What is their skill set? What is their cognitive ability? What are your core values? What are the KPIs? What are the primary purposes that that person needs to deliver on, so you can set proper expectations,
Yeah.
and then you have things to hold them accountable to after the hiring process.
Josiah, it's like a spouse, like, think you don't just go, they seem nice. Like, you tend to, if you're single and you're looking to be married, most people have a list. They know what their non-negotiables are. They know what values they want to mesh. They know the physical attributes, the mental, and it's no different for an employee, other than you can't do the physical stuff because it's discriminatory, but all the other stuff, you need to think about it. And it's not just like, oh, they seem like they'd be pretty good. When you're intentional, you'll find you tend to hire better people more frequently.
Well, and a big part of that, I think, is being much more proactive with your hiring. So let's jump into, I know one of your favorite metrics, is revenue per employee. And that's becoming a more generalized, accepted, just in the entrepreneurial realm of understanding of when you need to hire. And that's something that a lot of people, wait too long till they hire. Their current staff is burned out, they're burned out, they finally get a job posting and they get applicants. And it's like, hey, the first person that's decent in the interview is hired, right? And we all know that the stats of what does it cost when you lose an A player, what does it cost when you hire the wrong person, right? So let's talk about that a little bit, about how to know proactively, revenue per employee, or maybe some other data points that team members know, or owners know of when to hire.
Yep. Um, on a simple level, this comes down to what you showed us on the chart, profitability. And so there's a lot of different ways to get to that number, but again, to many of our calls, I'm looking at somebody commenting on here, Dr. Bill, who we did a job for, and I don't know anything about that off the top of my head, but it looks like we weren't able to place for him. We're really careful now on screening on the front end, what's going on in a market, what's the salary, and is the practice able to afford that? Because what we found is the biggest lever, hands down, a practice owner can control to attract good people is the salary for the associate doctor. And if you're not getting good quality applicants, today you can just do a quick Google search. Usually it's because the salary, there's other more compelling offers. And I know people love their mission, their purpose, their vision. It's clear. But at the end of the day, if there's a practice next door paying $25,000 more and it's 3.5 days a week, 4 days a week versus 6 days a week or 5 days a week, it's going to be harder to attract somebody in. Now that all comes back to what's your profitability, not knowing what you can afford, and revenue per employee. This is really common, Josiah. We'll get on the phone with $1 million a year practice owner, and then it's like, great, how many staff do you have? And they start counting. Well, I've got an associate, and then I'm on, I do most of the adjusting still, and then I've got an office manager, and I've got 4 staff and a tech, and it's like, so you have 7 people on $1 million. So you just divide that really quickly. I should have chosen a number that is easier math, but what is that? 100,000 divided by
142,000.
So that means you're collecting $142,000 per employee. We know that profit, and so I know right away, there's very little profit in that business. And probably most of the profit, the owner's having to take really as their salary to take care of people. So now when we have this conversation with that owner about, hey, you're in this rural area, it's going to cost you more money to attract a doctor who wants to live in the city to come out to where you are, or you're in a city, it's going to cost more because it's New York or Boston or somewhere. If the doctor doesn't know those numbers, then it's just they can get a little inundated with it, and it sounds daunting. But the bottom line is we shoot for $250,000 average per full-time employee. And if you have 2 part-time employees, combine them together to make 1 full-time employee. But we know it's just one way of looking at a clinic. If it does $1 million and there's 4 employees, I know there's probably profit margin in that clinic to pay an associate a higher salary so you get a better qualified person. Remember, this is a key thing too. What Chiro Matchmakers has evolved to in the last 2 years is we don't use job boards anymore because there's so many people unemployed on job boards. And when we were sending in people we'd find from job boards, we'd get a lot of complaints that we weren't sending in good quality doctors. Well, who are the good quality doctors? They're usually the people who are on a team, not looking on a job board. They've been there for 5 years. Well, why are they going to leave that job to come work for you? You need to have a great vision. You need to have a compelling story. And then it comes down to salary. You got to be profitable. And if that doc's making 90, but you're paying 125 and you've got something really interesting, you'll get their interest. And all of a sudden that doc can come over and can have an impact on your business. That's why these metrics are such a big deal, Josiah. And I love how you guys are getting clinic owners to look at this from day one, because probably about half of our calls at CMM, we end with either somebody's on the back of their career trying to exit and wants to find an associate to take over. And it's like, you're just going to do better off to just sell the clinic and have somebody take it over, because there's not enough margin for you to hire an associate. You still need that revenue to live off of. Or the other end where our favorite are docs like, all right, I'm busy enough, I'm ready to start scaling. It's like, well, let's look at your numbers first. Because, are you willing to give up $100,000 of money you take home right now to pay this associate Well, you are if they can take on the workload you're doing right now. If you've got to give up 100,000, but you're still seeing the majority of the patient base, that doesn't feel right. So revenue per employee generally should be 250,000 per full-time employee. You get up to 500,000. I know the profit. I had a call the other day. The guy had 4 employees on 1.7 million. I'm like, wow, you're making a lot of money. Like, it's just a really quick way to assess a business, but it comes back to knowing what are your labor costs, what are your marketing costs. And when we get on calls with docs who are trying to find associates, that is the biggest lever to pull, is what can you pay that associate? And does this make sense for you to pay that?
Yeah.
Or
And
is
I want to make a point I want to jump into what you just said
yeah,
because this is
please.
great. That's that one that you just said, 1.7 for doctors, that's, $450,000 per employee. Now, one thing that I think is a big issue in our profession is people think high profit margin is really, really good. And yes, that might look good on paper and might make you feel good inside, but that means you're not maximizing your potential. If you
Yeah,
have that much additional profitability, then you're not properly reinvesting back into your clinic to find more A players that can continue to grow the practice, that can invest
yeah,
back into, marketing strategies that can grow the business and get to the next level. So
yeah.
it's not 250K plus, right? It's like that's an ideal number. You don't want to be too high or too low. Again, too high, like you said, then you can have big single point of failure issues.
Totally.
You could lose one person and your business could topple over, right?
100%.
And so that's a big thing that I think a lot of chiropractors need to realize is the goal isn't profit margin. We'd much rather have 20% of a watermelon than 50% of a grape, or 100% of a grape,
Yeah,
for that matter.
yeah,
So understanding that fundamental evaluation of, again, going back to viewing your team as assets, reinvesting back into your team properly. But if you are only $100,000 per team member, then you're not maximizing the efficiency of your team members. So you're not, investing enough into training. You're not really getting the full ROI of the people that you have on your team that you potentially should have, right?
yeah,
So we talked about, right off the bat, mindset around team. Vastly important, viewing team members as assets, not as liabilities, common mistakes that people are having, A players versus C players, the additional, what you might take in pay, you know, the value that they're going to provide is going to way outweigh, a few more dollars, per hour. Cognitive tools, we've been talking about how to evaluate the right, seat for the individual, right? Revenue per employee to know when to hire the other people. But then at the end of the day, what really ties it together, what I want to jump into next is the culture, right, in your clinic. And I know that's something that you're really big on, and really being able to, not only get the people on your team, but keep them, for the long haul. So let's talk about, how do you develop, that great culture, atmosphere, experience for your team members so that you can keep retain those A players, maybe turn a B player into an A player,
yeah.
and elevate the whole company.
Yeah, there's a couple things around culture, but it has to start with the conversation we just came out of. And that is you let me start by saying it takes about 2 years to change the culture of an organization. And I used to scoff at that number, but I found that to be, if you decide today, we're going to change this, whatever the culture is, we're going to change it into pediatric practice, or we're going to change how the employees are paid and compensated, it takes about a 2 year process for that to really change the culture around. And so that starts with the owner being really clear on what's the role, what's the KPIs, if you're hiring from that place, you're already attracting, they're going to see the culture in the interview. They see what's expected of them. So they're coming into something and it's clear what they're coming into. When you don't have that stuff, a lot of times we're talking about, oftentimes the person you're hiring might be different in 2 months. Well, a lot of times the business can pull that to the employee too. This seemed different when I came in and interviewed than when I really learn about the business and what's going on. By the way, particularly with associates, one of the best hacks I can recommend is be transparent with your numbers. And I like when owners are transparent when hiring with their numbers. Here's my P&L. I mean, this person's invested in an education. Why should they join you and your team? It's kind of like one of the best advices I ever heard on hiring a financial planner is ask to see their tax returns. Like, why would I hire you to help me invest my money if
Hmm.
you're not doing as well as I am? So anytime I've ever hired a financial planner, can I see your tax returns? And boy, you want to watch people squirm quickly, but sorry, conversation's done. I think the same should be of associates. Hey, let me see your financial. You know, are your pants down as an owner, or are you willing to share that? Another thing on culture, Josiah, that I'm going to kind of view into a few of the comments. Chiropractors, this is a big deal. 70% of chiropractors are wired as what we call caregivers. In another life, they would have made great engineers or accountants or architects. And this is true for most medical professionals, most doctors. You know, to go through the education we have to, generally speaking, chiropractors are detailed people. They're they like systems, they like structure, they like predictable environments. And this is where chiropractic got it wrong so often with these comp models that are based on percentage. So I'm looking at this one job here, offered $100,000 on 900,000 for staff with 27% profit. I'm guessing that's 27%. So maybe that was the base salary, maybe 27% profit sharing. I think that's just profit of the clinic. Um, the difference we see if that owner bumped that to 115,000 in today's market, because 100 now is the standard. If the joint's paying 100, that's like McDonald's is paying 100 in chiropractic world. No offense to the joint, but I think we'd all agree with that. So back to a player who you know, if they can get 100,000 at the joint, they're, you know, a lot of times
Well, it's
people
the
are,
same thing with CAs. If I can get $20 at Chick-fil-A, if I can get $20 at Target, it's like that's the same
yeah,
exact thing, right?
it is. And we've kind of learned, we've like your first year in practice versus now our first year at Chiro Matchmakers, we weren't recruiters, we're all chiropractors. We want to help the profession. We say no to a lot more jobs. You know, we would take on CA jobs where they're paying 18, $20, 23, and you Google it and there's 100 jobs paying $25. Guess what? We're not going to find somebody quality. So that's I know I'm talking money, but that's a cultural thing. That's an A player thing. Like, and again, building a business, I'd rather you suck it up and run the business on your shoulders with the VCA a little longer, so you're more so your ratios are right. So as you bring people on, you can do that in a proper way. I found that works well. Also, fascinating stat, Josiah. We get about 4 times the applicants on jobs that are straight base salary than any kind of base plus bonus salary. So that's just
Wow,
something
that's a good insight.
we've tracked. It's fascinating. And I shouldn't say applicants, I'd say engagement. You know, chiropractors are so used to that. You know, make $150,000, but it's a combo of so chiropractors when it's just flat base, $115,000 base, we will get such better engagement when we reach out to doctors than, hey, yeah, it's a, you know, base plus commission kind of a thing. But that aside, let's say your comp model's right, your KPIs are right, you're attracting A players. What do you do when they get there? The simplest 2 things I can say on culture, Josiah, is A players are motivated to work around other A players. And A players leave teams because they get frustrated that as an owner, you're settling on a C and a B. So that's the mistake I've made too. I got my hands on a great A player, and that standard wasn't prevalent within the culture of the business. And so eventually the A player goes and they move on because we're tolerating people that aren't doing the KPIs. We're making excuses for them. They're slipping. And it really, you have to have a standard. If you're going to bring on an A player, that's going to ripple through your business really quickly. And just expect you might be getting rid and replacing a few other people to keep the A player, or the A player is going to leave and you're going to be back to hiring B and C players. Um, so that's a big deal. Measurement. A players love to be measured. How am I doing? What are my stats? What can I do better? So that's back to this. If you hired them with clear KPIs, they know the job, they know what's expected, they know the role, and that's what you're measuring on. That's what you're training on. A players love that. There's no surprise. You know, now I can see your financials for your business. I know what you want me to do. The job description is clear. What I'm being measured on is clear. You're going to train me on how to do things better. Great. You are training me. it's a win-win. It's when that stuff gets a little wonky. You're not really measuring, you're not really giving feedback. You didn't quite have the training process down. It wasn't exactly clear what the job description was. So now you're changing it. You're changing roles. The comp model was a little ambiguous. You're a little guarded because your country club membership and your student loan and your health insurance and your cell phone are all paid, your vacations through the business. So you don't want to show the associate because like those are the things that really get in the way of attracting an A player. And those are the simple things that a really good business does to keep and attract great talent. One of the best advices I ever got, I was in the CEO group years ago, and there's this plumber, and he had a $20 million a year plumbing business in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And every summer he took 3 months off. And his youngest plumber had been with him 20 years. And one day he was like, Alan, he kind of, he'd seen my business enough. And back then we were out doing screenings and we were doing workshops every Tuesday and we were doing trainings every week. And he pulled me aside and he's like, if I can give you some advice, he said, I've got a great business that really doesn't need a lot of me. He said, and I really made it simple. I hired the best plumbers in town. I pay them more than anybody else is going to pay them. So I don't have to worry about them leaving. And all they do all day is they plumb. I've got a marketing team. I've got a training team. My plumbers don't have to worry about any of that. They do what they went to school to do. They know they won't make more money anywhere, and they know it's the best job in town. And he's like, you probably need to look at your business through that lens because I see you having associates leave. I see CAs coming. And that really changed the way we structured. And we then started to figure out how do we build a leadership team where we can oversee the marketing, we can do the training, and we can really find great chiropractors, pay them better. We start at 125 on a base salary in our clinics. Um, they can't make more anywhere. So, as long as we do what we said we do and they get to show up, they get to be chiropractors and they get to go home and not worry about it, that's worth it. My docs don't want to own the business. They see the stress of payrolls and marketing, and they're like, you can have that. And a lot of younger chiropractors feel that way today. But a lot of old school owners like me, we kind of came up in this weird time and we're stuck in some of those old premises. So the market's always going to tell you. And who's responding to your job is going to tell you a lot about the job you have, how clear it is. But when it comes to culture, Josiah, it's the front end and it's doing what you say you're going to do and it's letting everybody know what they're being measured on. And then finding great people that are wired to do that. And then I don't believe in motivation. Like I did that. I went to seminars. I got hyped up. I came back and sometimes I could hype up the team for a week if I took them with me. Sometimes I'd come up hyped up and they would look at me weird. I just realized, man, that's a losing battle. And the better battle is just find great people, let them know what the job is, compensate them well, make sure your prices are set so you can afford to do that. It's another big conversation we haven't touched on, but I mean, we're up to $95 a visit, straight subluxation clinic. Um, I think we're going to 110 here in a couple months. Like, if you're still at 30, $40, sorry, in today's world, there's for what it's going to take to hire these good people, that's part of the problem right there. You've got, and I love what you've done with people like Blueprint. You figured out what are other services I can do to move the case value average, the lifetime value of these patients up. That creates margin, not for you to make more money, but for you to attract top talent. I mean, there's a reason you built that
Exactly.
clinic. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this has been really great. I want to go one more topic, and then we're going to jump into Q&A. You kind of touched on it a little bit, right? But hey, maybe you don't have the right profit margin, or hey, maybe you're doing too many activities. You don't feel like you can hire the next full, cost local employee. One thing that I've taken huge advantage of, and I know you guys are really big with Chiro Matchmakers on, is your virtual CAs. And so,
Yeah.
for my own, clinic, we have 5 for my clinic. And then for Lucro, we have quite a few as well. And so that's a huge opportunity. The talent around the world, oftentimes is just as good, if not better, than what we can find here in America for a very small fraction of the cost. And so there's lots of activities that can be done even more and more every single day,
Yep.
virtually. And so, talk a little bit,
Yeah.
into that topic about how doctors can better utilize virtual talent, in their clinics, to automate tasks, to take things off their plate, and also at a lower cost.
Yeah. Thanks for, we get calls every day like, what is this? How's this work? So let me explain it because it is a new world. And this is really, I think, the bridge between where the world is now and maybe where AI might take us. It might not, but there's this kind of interim space we're in right now. And the first thing to know is, um, so we staff out of Mexico, the Philippines, and Honduras. Belarus, for a lot, we have another business that does staffing in other industries in tech. Belarus, there's some amazing tech people. It really depends on what you're looking for. But for service industries, we found a lot of great people. And the big thing that I think is misunderstood is everybody in our team is college educated. We have nurses, we have, uh, gosh, you name it. We have accountants, we have engineers on the team, teachers. They make a better living working for us than they do working in their educated profession in their home country.
Oh yeah, we have one that was an electrical engineer.
Yeah,
We have another one who's a PhD professor, you know?
just like, and so you can find people right now, if you go to Google, you can find $8 an hour VAs. Here's the problem with that. Back to our ABC player. You do get what you pay for. Also, the problem with that is you go through an agency. So now that we messed with that at Chiro Matchmakers early on, and the problem is we weren't able to control who we were hiring because they didn't really work for us. They worked for an agency. We weren't able to control their technical ability. And then another big hidden expense in working offshore is, the HIPAA certifications, all of the data security, so that, if people are working in your EHR, we provide all of that in our pricing. Our rates average anywhere between $14 to $18 an hour. And so, but there's no additional, phone lines, secure data network lines, cybersecurity, HIPAA trainings. We include all of that. And then we put everybody through CA training. And so what we found is, there probably will be a day where AI is good enough that it can answer your phones. There's a couple people early to market with those systems. We've tested a couple in our clinics. They're just not as good as our people. And the other problem you have right now is how you interface with your EHR. So, it's that's just a challenge. So, that's a huge deal is, let's just say, phones. We started answering phones when we just weren't in the office. What if we answer phones on Saturdays or at lunches or evenings? All of a sudden we looked at our data and we're like, we picked up 8 extra patients this month. 3 of those were PIs. Gosh, that was like, 20, 30 grand of income just by answering the phone. So that was our starting point. Then we realized we have multiple clinics. I wonder if we could lower our revenue per employee if the phone wasn't ringing in the clinic. What if we have some people, all they did was our phones? That could be interesting. And then we started saying, as we got into all this marketing with Go High Level, and we started learning, we get a lot more people to show up and schedule when we talk to them instead of just relying on the automated emails and texts. And then we realized, wow, if we respond within 1 minute, we got like a 60% show rate on our leads. So then we started like, all right, so let's move all of our phones to where those are being answered. And then we have a ton of KPIs. Like you, I love data, so I want KPIs on the clinics nightly, weekly, monthly. And we hired systems that were AI bots that were supposed to generate them, and they just never were as good as our numbers. So we have staff offshore that goes in, and every night I get my dashboards. Again, there will be a time where you can AI a lot of this, but I think what we test it daily, and we're usually disappointed. It's like, it's almost there, but it's just not quite there. It's not as good as what we can do. And then we started realizing, wow, we don't really bill insurance, but we have to a lot of times call and verify it for people. That takes time if we can't do an automated system. And then we found our PI, what if we just called the attorneys on these closed cases every couple of weeks and just bugged them? Would that make a difference? I think we saw like a $500,000 increase in PI collections just by calling every 2 weeks, bugging people. Hey, checking in, checking in, checking in. And then it became a game. Well, what else? So then it was like, what about uploading, our thermal scans and our EMG scans and our x-rays? What about drawing on x-rays? What about notes? What about mapping people out in our schedule? That's taking the front desk some time. Could we and you can just all of a sudden what happened, Josiah, is two things. one, my staff got to really just do what they loved all day, so I didn't have to motivate them. So my extroverted greeter is greeting and loving on people all day. Welcome, come on in, office tour. They handle the transaction, but then they don't have to sit there putting stuff in to map people out. They don't have to do the follow-ups. That all that. And the bigger thing though is then when a CA left, we were like, wow, this is a lot easier to replace them now because before we'd have to teach them 50 different things. They had to know how to use Sked and the text platform and Fortis for reoccurring, and we use Genesis, the HR system, and all of our procedures. And now it's like, they've only have about 8 tasks. So it's enabled us to work a lot leaner. And it's brought stability because at Chiro Matchmakers, when you hire us, we build it, we take your training videos and we build SOP manuals and we update those. So if a VCA leaves, we have another person trained within a couple days versus when we have
Oh,
to hire somebody in house, that could be
yeah.
weeks, then you got to train them. So now all of a sudden, when somebody left, it's not that stressful. We can find somebody to come in. It's a lot easier to find those greeters than it is sometimes the people who are really good with all the data. And so that's really been a trick for us scaling and putting a lot more money into our bottom line to compensate our docs, to go into me as the owner's pocket, also to bring this level of stability into the practice. And another huge one that I just noticed as we were coming on is social media. That's maybe been the biggest benefit. And this is not marketing, but we have found our Instagram page, and I invite people. My Chiro clinics are called Illuminate, N8 Chiro. Uh, Look at my Illuminate pages. Look at the Chiro Matchmaker page. Josiah, I got to give you a shout out in a minute. Josiah, I was at UAC last week. We're in a group called UAC of multi-million-dollar chiropractic business owners. I had the greatest Josiah story from somebody I got to share with you that I hadn't heard you talk about, and I'm like, that's genius. Um, the UAC chiropractic page is done by the CMM team, but we cut reels from our clinics, we post, and it's amazing what we've learned is we try to have people go look at our Instagram, not to drive new patients, but to build value for lifetime value so people stay longer. And so new people coming in understand the culture of the clinic. So back to culture. So we really do our best to capture on Instagram. So they see the doctor, they hear the doctor, they see the workshops. We're big on, we do corrective care with a lot of home care built into it. We want people to know that so when they're on our website and they click on and look, they get a feeling of the culture of what they're coming in for. And man, we have seen that improve our conversion rate and our lifetime value rates. It's not helping in terms of number of new patients, but the quality of people understanding who we are and what we are and what we stand for has been amazing. And we've been able to just, go look at, if you're interested in that, look at the design of the businesses I just told you that I run. And that's our team generally. We try to have 4 or 5 pieces a day going out in stories and posts. And it's just been amazing what that's done for the culture and the stability of our business. So again, we used to try to do that in house. Another huge one we offer is we just go in. So then we have all of our patients follow our page, and we like every day we go in, Chiro Matchmakers, and we like your followers' posts, and we send messages and DMs, and we comment on posts so that people think, wow, that clinic really loves me. Like they're always my Chiro comments on my stuff. Well, it's not us, but I didn't want to do that. But it just shows your patients you're engaged, and I think so many chiropractors are missing that piece of the puzzle on their clinic right now. And that one's maybe I've seen the biggest indirect benefit for our Chiro clinics, creating culture, putting it out there in the world. I know I'm throwing up a lot of information,
No,
but
I mean, I love it. I'm just sitting back here. That's what, man, I've appreciated you, as a friend for a number of years now, but I'm really just soaking in that to me, we do this and this, and oh yeah, it's like every single thing you're doing is like, no, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. Oh, well, that's a great idea. Like it's like, but it's so
Josiah, I got
casual. You're just so like,
well,
that's what it's so
well,
awesome.
it's scar tissue. But I got to give this has to get out before we leave. And I just went, that's a Josiah stat. I think it was Elise I was talking to at a dinner. It might have been somebody else. And they were saying, you said, I've always been raised in chiropractic with, you need to get a 3-to-1 return on your advertising spend or it's not worth it. And they're like, Josiah taught me timeout. Well, that might not make sense at all. What's your profit margin? So 3-to-1 might not even get you back to break even. And I paused and I went, that is such a simple metric. Again, back to what you're doing with Lucro, it changes your decision making on what you pay your people, what you charge for services, where you allocate your spend. And I thought, yeah, that's right. Like just because we brought back 3,000 on 1,000, but what's the profit margin on those three? Was that even 1,000? So, what looked like a 3-to-1 return, all of a sudden I realized, a lot of times that's really not a return if I look at the profit that brought back. So I give you kudos on that stat. I don't know. Does that ring a bell?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's like my main thing.
I love it. I love
That
it.
and percentage of schedule filled. That's what we get. We have a whole master class on that, but I think those are like the first one is kind of the easy, quick, right off the cuff, like extreme confidence when you know that number, and then the percentage of schedule filled is like I think the number one missing stat in the whole profession. We have a master class I can post for that, but I want to get into Q&A. Thanks for so much for all your insights, your wisdom, on all of these different topics. Team is such a massive topic, like we were talking about with KPIs and cognitive evaluations, A versus C, opportunity costs, revenue per employee, primary skills, primary purposes, objective measures, virtual CAs, doctors, front desk, back office, tech CAs. I mean, it's such a massive topic, and there's so many levels and layers and depths, and it's just so important. It's not something that there's just so much and we can just forget about it. It's like you have to master each of those individual areas, and you have to put them together, and you have to assimilate them and wrap them in culture, like we are talking about, and you have to do all those things to be successful. Those aren't, you can't leave any of those pieces of the puzzle unturned, or otherwise they're all going to cause massive issues. And so, putting those pieces one at a time, I'm always big on taking action steps. So if you wrote down 30 different things that you want to implement, what is that number one thing, from the call? What's the top takeaway that's going to have the greatest impact, that may hopefully takes the least amount of work? Identify that one thing, work on that this afternoon, tomorrow, the next day, and then go to the next thing. And it's just going to take one thing at a time, and really to get in that area of focus. What are those things that are on your plate that a virtual team member could do, or a current team member, could do to free you up to really truly be, the CEO in your practice?
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
thanks so much for hopping on here.